So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Barry Cranford. I organise a number of tech communities, both in London and virtual. I know a lot of names I can see that I do recognise. So one of the communities that we run is the London CTOs. And about 18 months ago, we started something that was happening every Friday, which was the CTO Lunch Club. And the idea was just to run a series of events where people could come together and meet other people that they had similar interests in. So whatever subject we ran it on, obviously people came to watch that, and we'd run a networking document everyone could add their LinkedIn details to and connect with others in the same space. So I've worked with Turntable now for about 5 years, and they do a lot in the financial services and fintech space. I was speaking to one of their clients, and it just was like, well, that sounds like a great idea. I wish there was something like that in this space. So speaking to Sam, and we figured we'd start something there. So that's what this is, the FS Tech Coffee Club. Hopefully you've all got a coffee. If not, feel free to rush and get one now. We've started with a few different areas in financial services and in fintech, and we've pivoted slightly to run a series of events where we're looking at founders, co-founders, CTOs of either scaling or scaled companies, just to look at some of the challenges they're facing, some of the tech they're working with, and use it as an opportunity to just get deeper within a particular niche within the financial services or fintech space. So I'm going to hand over now to Jon Freedman and Sam, and of course Daniel Gold for the rest of the session. Jon.
Thank you, Barry, and thanks everybody for coming along today. My name's Jon. Sam and I are co-hosting the Tech Coffee Club, although I'm letting the side down. I just have water today. This week we're joined...
Stop, Ryan. Cancel.
This week we're joined by Daniel Gold from Stratiphy, and we're going to talk through some of the scaling challenges he and his business have faced. Sam and I have known each other for about 20 years, so we like to keep things fairly informal here. If you want to jump in with a question as we're going through, either raise your virtual hand or pop it in the Zoom chat, and we will pull that into the discussion as we go through the session. And if we have time at the end, either we run out of time because we're having so much to talk about, or we will pull some stuff in from the audience and our own Q&A at the end. So I will hand over to Daniel to introduce himself and Stratiphy, and then we'll kick off.
Yeah, thanks for the introductions, Barry, Jon, I'm delighted to be here, first of all, and it's great to see that there's kind of anyone who wants to hear about my background or the journey we've been through, but hopefully I've got a few interesting stories to share which do resonate, and I do think some of them are kind of going to be relevant across different industries, different sectors. I also have just a water today, but I'll try and keep it high-spirited and look forward to an interesting discussion.
Thanks, Daniel. I'll get started, and I think one of the things that I like to start with in sessions like this is just a very wide open, why are we here, right? What have you built? Tell us a little bit about Stratiphy, and I guess to keep a business edge on it, Daniel, if you could talk about what gap in the market did you spot that you've solved by building Stratiphy? Why does it exist?
Yeah, sure. So look, at a high level, Stratiphy is a personal investment platform where you can build your own investment strategy and invest according to your own principles, goals, and objectives. So the kind of journey to get here was, I don't know where to start exactly, but my education is in mathematics. So, my background, a PhD in algebraic geometry. And after that, I've always had a kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, right? So I started up a business after my PhD, which was a solar energy business. I did that for 4 years. It was kind of an experiment at the time. That was my first entrepreneurial experience. But we ended up being a relatively small company and closed it up. And I then worked in banking in London, which is what you typically do if you kind of have a technical education. So I worked in interest rate option pricing for most of my time. and was doing things involving coding and mathematics. And it was a really interesting job, really kind of good people around me. So I was enjoying it actually, but I started earning some money for the first time, and I thought I'd try and invest it. I didn't want to just do what I saw everyone else doing, which is investing into models or thematic funds. Didn't particularly excite me because it was a bit boring. You're just doing what someone else tells you to do, basically. So I wanted to take control of my investment. So I thought, what's the best way to do that? I look at what the professionals doing. In my network, I had friends who were working in cross-asset investment strategy desks in top-tier banks. I thought, I'll look at what they're doing and try and copy it for my own investments. So they were building these strategies which were based on quantitative rules and then using that to invest. And I thought that was really appealing, really exciting. And I started building it. It started off as like some kind of Excel spreadsheet. I started using VBA, a bit of C++ to do analysis. And it was working. I was making investments and they were making some profit, and it was kind of updating it. But it very quickly became apparent to me this is a very unwieldy process. I have to get a lot of data, I have to update a lot, maintain all the algorithms, deal with all kinds of issues like missing data points. So I thought, it's a great idea, but practically it's taking up a lot of my time. And I actually wanted to spend my time going to the pub and meeting my friends. So I thought I'll just find an app to do this. And to my surprise, there wasn't an app to do this. And that was actually a big surprise at the time because it's such a simple idea. Like the ability to create your own strategy and then invest into it, it just didn't exist. The only things I found were, self-directed investment platforms like Freetrade or Hargreaves. For the other end of the spectrum, we had things like Nutmeg, where you can buy into an investment strategy that is based on quantitative rules, and it's an excellent platform, but I don't get to control it. So I kind of I'm at the starting point. It's still, to me, a bit of a boring solution that doesn't meet my goals. I'm not here to put any of those things down, and they're all great companies in their own right, but there was no solution that met what I wanted to do. And so that was kind of the idea, to start up Stratiphy. But I had some kind of objectives. I wanted it to be very simple and accessible and affordable. And so I guess as we kind of delve into the journey we've taken, we'll find out why achieving those things are quite difficult in this particular business.
I think I've got a follow-up. I think this is like classic founder model of, oh, I seem to have built something that's useful for me and solves a problem that I have. I wonder if it's useful for other people. And that's a fairly well-trodden path. But what isn't is, I have a math PhD and a nice job in options pricing. I'll go and be a founder instead. Like, how did you make the break?
Look, I mean, it wasn't easy, to be honest. It's a good environment to be in banking. Like, they look after you well and it's comfortable, doing interesting work. There's just something missing though at the end of the day, in my view. Like, it's not for everyone. Right? For some people, this is a great career path, but for me, there was something missing. And I think we touched on it in a kind of prep session. My father was an entrepreneur. He had his own. He was an audio journalist, right? So I kind of got that spirit from him. I wanted to do something which I was taking kind of my destiny into my own hands. Plus, the other aspect of it is, in the corporate world, you are a very small part of a big machine, and what you do doesn't really have a big impact on the company. The bank I was at would be fine if I didn't turn up for like 6 months. So that's how it is. So I wanted to do something that had an impact, and they could have an impact on everyday people. So I just wanted to have some kind of impact. Really, that was what motivated me to try and do this.
As someone who's moved from the corporate world into being a technology founder, one of the things that's given me some reassurance when I launch my company is, well, if this doesn't work, I can always go back. Right? Is there an element of that in the way that you think as well? Like, options pricing is like, it's not entirely a solved problem, right?
Pricing an option to go back into banking.
It's
right. What's the discount on my future salary?
That you do think about that, and it depends on your risk appetite, right? I will be able to go back into a job and I'll be fine. The real risk is, my wife like not being happy with the kind of risk I've taken and not achieved anything over an X period of time, right? So you kind of got to look at the whole kind of family interaction in the balance. So, there's something to think about, but she's been very supportive, and, I think that is kind of an enabler in a sense for this kind of business, having someone behind the scenes who does support and helps you get along the way.
Nice. I love building apps and tools to solve something that you yourself feel the need for, because you start with a product market fit for at least one customer, if nothing else. So we're going to delve now into the topic of regulation and the FCA authorization. That is a challenge, and one of the things Daniel mentioned when we were prepping for this is that people told him this was going to be impossible. So talk us through what it meant to build a sophisticated investment approach that's modeled on what banks do, but pitch it at retail investors and get the FCA to buy into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I often start off by kind of prefacing this with the fact that I probably wouldn't have even started this business if I knew how complex all of this would have been in terms of regulation, technology, marketing, and the regulatory side of it is something I didn't have a clue what I was getting into in the first place. I mean, I was working in a top-tier bank in the UK. I was in the model governance team, so I knew about the governance process, and that put me in a good position actually in terms of the conversations we had to have with the FCA, but I didn't really know what was involved in terms of complexity, timing, cost. Like I started off, as I said earlier, with the vision of creating a business where I can help everyday investors to kind of get access to professional investment management techniques. And so that introduces complexities in itself. It sounds very, much like you're trying to help people, but from the regulator's point of view, there's all risks. You want to deal with everyday investors. You want to introduce automation to them, and you want to introduce complex investment strategies, and you want them to control it. All of these things could go wrong. And so that's the perspective they're looking at it from. So I was trying to start this business in a de-risk kind of way. Like we started off with an application to be an appointed representative of another authorized firm. I don't know if that means anything to anyone in the audience, but essentially it means you're piggybacking on some other firm's umbrella authorization, and they're allowing you to do your regulated activity. That was the cheaper and easier way to market. It wasn't optimal because we wouldn't have been able to offer managed portfolios. We wouldn't be able to buy and sell on behalf of the customer at our discretion. Each customer would have to agree to what we suggest they do. It still would have been a new product in the market and quite a nice one, but not quite the best. So we started off on that process and it was going for 6 months, but then we had to stop because the FCA decided they wanted to review the whole regime. It wasn't anything to do with us. They stopped the process for all firms in the market, and we didn't have any indication about when they would let us continue. At the time, we had a very small amount of money in the bank, right? We would run out of money if we didn't make a decision about what to do. We couldn't just sit around doing nothing. So at that point, we decided to go for a direct application to the FCA to be an authorized firm. And that's a much higher bar to cross and much more expensive, but it did give us the certainty that we have a concrete process to follow and we could just move forward as a business. So, at that point, we went out to find a consultant to help us with the application. There was a lot of challenges at this point. We had to get legal advice in terms of is what we're doing acceptable to the FCA in the first place, in terms of, if we automate your strategy, are we providing advice, or are we providing just guidance which you follow? A lot of the lawyers we spoke to said that you're providing advice, and with the setup you're trying to do this, the FCA will never authorize you. You know, we found some fantastic lawyers in London who were supportive of our idea, and said that this is actually compliant if you do it in the right way, with the right controls, the right guardrails for clients, and you are trying to help people. So they thought we could get it over the line. We found some excellent compliance consultants as well to support the application. And that process took end to end about 2 years to get authorized, and it was very expensive. We had to set up a lot of the processes which I saw in the bank in terms of governance, redundancy, specialist roles for each work stream. So, you know, being from a corporate background did help a lot, actually, in terms of seeing what best practices in this and what bank corporates do. But it was a huge process and a huge undertaking to do. And as of April last year, we did get authorized. So we are now able to manage your money according to your rules that you set up.
Congratulations.
That's awesome.
That's a slog. I found that working with working with lawyers when you're in corporate, like when you're working for someone else's business, is very, very different to working with them when it's your business and your money, and you really recognize the value of 15 minutes, and you recognize the value of formulating your question in a way that, you know, the answer is a short one rather than a long one. I found that if you allow, you know, I'm friends with lawyers, right? But if you allow them to be loquacious, they will be. One of the struggles that I've had working in a regulated environment kind of from the outside is you'd think that the rules are very strict and clear, and that the guide rails are very obvious, but they're actually not. Like, I had this time, I run a software business, and we wanted to take on a major enterprise as a client, and they had strict rules about things like our network topology and the color of our network cables and which network hardware we were using. And so I told them, I gave them the map, and I told them which network hardware we were using, and they said, well, that's not on our allowed list of network hardware. I said, oh, could I please have a look at the allowed list of network hardware so I can go and make a purchase? And they said, no, we can't show you the allowed list. So it's just very, very frustrating. I mean, but it sounds like, you know, if you're having conversations with consultants and lawyers about the difference between the meaning of the word advice and the meaning of the word guidance, you must have come up against that quite a lot. So what kind of boundaries did the regulator provide to you, and how did you balance that with building a product, like trying to innovate and bring something to the market?
Yeah, I think your kind of anecdote around cable colors is kind of spot on. They have a way of working, a set of rules they want to follow, but they're not very open around what they are. And I think they do that deliberately. They want to maintain control, but also balance it with flexibility and the ability to innovate and introduce new products in the market. And so they're in a difficult position. I kind of do sympathize with them. They're trying to do some interesting stuff, but they are held back, and for good reason, right? There's a lot of fraudulent or suboptimal solutions in the market, especially in finance, and people need protection from complexity and things that are not, you know, in the best interests. I think the new process they've come up with in terms of consumer duty, I actually think it's a really good approach. So again, this is a technical regulatory thing. I don't know if people in the audience are familiar with it, but the FCA's new paradigm for telling if a product is compliant is around consumer duty. Does it meet, does it protect customers? Does it work in their best interests? And the rules are very vague here, and the FCA has a lot of discretion around how they apply them. But essentially the rules are saying, like, would you sell this to your grandmother, right? If you would, it's compliant. If you wouldn't, it's not. It's kind of like Bill and Ted, just be good or be good to each other. And I like it because that was the background I had in banking, was in risk management. Everything I was doing was trying to introduce risk management in a sophisticated way to people, helping to ensure they have diversification, making sure their investments are based on analysis and not based on emotion. All of these things are going to help people. they can be done badly or they can be done well. So I think it just comes down to how you approach the FCA and explain the product and convince them you're the right, outfit to execute this. And then I kind of felt that there is buy-in. It's not a simple process. There's due process to follow, especially as an outsider, not starting from a, the umbrella of a big company. It's harder. It takes time, but I do think they are kind of open to it, more so than in possibly some other jurisdictions.
So you mentioned in hindsight the amount of work around this, if you'd known you might not have started, made me think quite a few startups actually face unknown challenges. People are optimistic when they found their business, they think they have a great idea, then they run into the wall of reality. But perhaps that's actually why there are market opportunities for companies to come in. And with that pivot that you went through to get direct FCA authorization, I was wondering if you think that acts as a bit of a moat to your business because it took 2 years. That's going to scare a lot of people, a lot of founders. Or is it more that you've had a first mover disadvantage, you've paid the costs, and now the FCA will just approve the next competitor in your niche?
It depends who I'm talking to. If I'm pitching to investors, it's definitely a moat. But it's a good question, and I guess only time will tell if it's a moat or kind of a sunk cost that we can't recover. I think it's a moat. Like, I don't think the bar to authorization is going to get any easier. I think the level of protection that the FCA affords to retail investors is exceptionally high, and that's not going to go down anytime soon. And so I think the fact that we have that authorization is something we can leverage. And it also, in a way, it does open doors to competitors, but I think that's a good thing. I think the more people trying to do this, the better. It normalizes what we're trying to do. It actually provides new products and solutions to customers. I mean, at the end of the day, I want to see great solutions for retail investors. Obviously, we are going to be part of that story, but I think the more options people have, that just provides a better outcome for everyone. I mean, the regulatory side of things is just one of those examples where we've had to pivot or deal with a challenge, but there's been challenges across the board, which could have been the downfall of the company at any point in the last few years.
I guess so. So you're kind of painting this picture of a business that we can work backwards, right? Stratiphy exists, and you've got a product and you've got some customer base and things are ticking over. But like to work backwards and to get here from where you started working on an options desk, there's been some incredible challenges. We'll talk about technology later on in the hour, but this huge regulatory issue and the regulatory burden of an organization who's basically a gatekeeper to your market. And my thinking is that the reason they set the regulations and the way that they communicate to you what they are is not that it's intentionally fuzzy and you've got to do a lot of work to get there. It's that the rules themselves are kind of secondary to a mindset that they want you to be in. They want you to think in a way that is the same as them. And the rules are like to show that you're conformant with that mindset, right? It's nice to say, would you sell this to your grandmother? But they don't want to expose the rules to you because people who are intelligent will game the rules, right? So given that, like how do you think about working in a market with investors who are kind of strictly or technically unsophisticated? You've built a product for folks who aren't themselves regulated or certified to work in markets. How have you gone about building a product that honestly works for those people and can help them generate wealth?
That's a really good question, and it's extremely difficult. It's something we are constantly trying to work out and get right. So, I mean, the kind of UI, the tech has gone through continuous revamps and improvements and changes. I mean, it's I don't think it's a process we'll get right for a long time, but I think it starts from just a vision of wanting to have something that is simple and understandable to the mass market and doesn't hide away complexity, because that's the other side of the issue, right? We want to make it accessible, but we also don't want to treat people like idiots. We want them to have enough information to understand end to end what the system is doing so they can make an informed decision. And that is something I have an issue with a lot of financial solutions in the market. I mean, a lot of conversations we've had in our team evolve around, it's an endemic problem in finance where they introduce acronyms and complexity, trying to make things look complicated because that's just what's cool in finance. Everything tends to end up looking like a Bloomberg terminal because that's traditional in the finance world, and it's just full of charts and it's technical, and that's what people look for. We wanted to do something the opposite. We could have ended up making something very complex, and most of the solutions I've seen trying to do what we're doing are very complex. They're all involving some kind of logical process to create a strategy, so pseudo code, lots of charts, lots of things to keep on top of. So we wanted to do the opposite, to make it super simple, super accessible, but still give people that level of understanding. And that balance is extremely difficult. I think the way we've done it, or we've attempted to do it, is that we've got a very simple user interface where you can get into the strategy creation process at a high level without much complexity. And then if you're a more sophisticated investor, you can go into advanced controls and make more sophisticated decisions and then look at more sophisticated charts. So we're trying to make it a dual tier process. You don't have to have the sophistication if you don't want it, or the complexity, but if you want it, you can still access it. And I guess the proof of if we've done a good job with that will be in the pudding, if people like you like it and use it. But I think we're making good progress at the moment.
That's really interesting. Financial literacy as a goal for society in general is really important, and it feels like you're pulling people forward rather than setting this sort of hurdle that people have to get over in order to access this type of investment.
Yeah, I mean, hurdles are another thing we're trying to overcome in the market. So the complexity to access sophisticated tools is one, but the cost is another. So, to be a client of one of these top wealth managers, you typically need portfolios of 100K at least. So that, people are held back from, I guess, equality in financial outcomes by either not having enough money or not having the connections or the knowledge to do something. So we're trying to solve all three of those. And that's not an easy challenge, and there's a lot of different companies trying to do similar things, but we're trying to do it in our own particular way, which gives people control and gives people full information. And I personally think that empowers people.
Just before we move on, do you think there's a future in financial education, like as Jon said, like pulling people forward to becoming sophisticated investors? There's like classic pricing model of commoditizing your complement, which is another way of saying like you need to build yourself a market. Have you like how are you going about that?
Yeah, I mean, the financial education piece is huge, and I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, it's something that we wanted to make front and center of the app. I think we got Nikki, my co-founder, on the call. She was instrumental in getting that into the app and as one of the kind of core components. So in our kind of tray of items at the bottom, we got one called Stratworthy, which is our education piece. And we put a lot of effort into designing and building that. And that is a free to access system where everyone can just learn about basic concepts of investing, but also of how our app works in quantitative investing, systematic investing. And the idea is it's kind of like a Wikipedia or a repository for everyone to learn whatever they need to. Because if people don't understand the product, we haven't done our job right. Even if they've got a good outcome, we want them to understand it.
Nice. Just a reminder to folks, if you do have questions, we welcome them. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat or engage folks there. There's also, you can hit the react button down at the bottom of your screen in Zoom and stick your hand up, and we'll come to you very quickly. But my next question, and one that I'm sure is on everyone's mind, is how on earth do you pay for all this, right? So like starting a company, there's a couple of ways of doing it, right? You scrimp and save, or you have a partner who works in a well-paying job and they give you some breathing room, or you use your credibility and go to investors. It sounds like 2 years of burn, of facing off against regulators and compliance folks and having to engage consultants and lawyers in London doesn't sound cheap. Can you give us some insight into how you've done it?
Yeah, I mean, funding, I guess this will come up in every one of your interviews. It's a constant challenge for startups, especially in the UK. And I guess the overarching principle we're taking is kind of winging it. Like to get this started, I was working sort of 2 jobs, right? So I was doing this evenings and weekends, and I was working my full-time job. And I did that as long as I possibly could, because it's expensive to do this, and bills have to be paid. But eventually you do have to kind of leave your job and do something full-time. Otherwise it's not going to work. I just don't believe that's possible. So I did decide 2 years ago to quit my job and do this full-time. We're not coming from a background. I think there's kind of 2 tracks you typically take starting up a business. One is your well-connected and a successful exited founder, and then you have your network of investors you can turn to, and then you get a couple of million in the door for your sort of founding capital, and that's one route. Ours is the opposite. I didn't have that background, that network, so the whole thing was bootstrapped from day one. So I basically built a prototype, evenings and weekends. I had to learn new languages, new processes, cloud computing, which I had to turn to my friends and ask for some tutorials in the middle of the night how to do things. So I kind of worked to do whatever I could to get a prototype ready that I could show to investors, and then once we had that, try and raise our first friends and family round, which is a whole story in itself. That's extremely difficult in itself, but I guess everyone goes through it. You have to go out with a begging bowl and get whatever money you can. And then we took our first check, brought on board a team of people who complemented my skills. I kind of wanted to have an initial team of complementary skills, so marketing, development, and me as kind of business development, management. And part of it worked out, part of it didn't work out. The team changed a bit, but we did have a prototype which then we could take out, and so I did have some money, which I could go and hire a developer to build the next version, which was a more professional version, and then take that forward to raise more money. So we've essentially done 3 rounds of friends and family. We've introduced some crowdfunding into that. So that's been a kind of a novelty for us. It's been a good experience, to be honest. It's been, we're building something for the mass market. So we're getting directly in front of our customers through crowdfunding. So these people provide funding, plus they end up being customers, plus you get marketing for it. So it's been a good experience there. We're the kind of institutional fundraising in the UK is very difficult. There's a very low risk appetite here. There's not as much funding as there used to be, and so I think it's been a challenge for us to raise institutional funding. I don't think it will be forever, but I think that's kind of worked in our favor in a sense. It's kind of given us full control of our destiny. We've got a much more close-knit team, I think, as a result. Everyone is fully invested, and I think that built a lot of resilience in the business and discipline. And I can tell you from what I've seen from other companies in our network who raised very significant checks early on when we were getting started. The majority of them are closed down and we're still around. So I think that, you know, it says something. So it's not all about the amount of money or where you get it from. It's about the discipline in the team, in my view.
So I liked your point that you can't really be a part-time founder, but you can get quite a long way before you need to be full-time. And
Yeah,
getting that prototype or MVP makes it real for your investors. Crowdfunding, I seen another B2C, so business to consumer startup doing that as well. You touched on it. That marketing plus funding combo is really nice. So it's interesting talking about other companies raising big checks and failing, but in your friends and family rounds, you aren't bringing in advisors or people like repeat investors who have networks that can introduce you to this person, that person. Has that been a hindrance? Like, would you change anything about your funding? It sounds like not if you did it again.
look, I mean, I would like it to be easier because I'd like to be able to spend more time on developing the product. But you know, I do think there is truth to what I'm saying. Like the challenge has a lot of value in itself. I think that discipline you get sets you up for success. And I also quite like the kind of network we built through our investors. So these are people who are, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. First of all, if you're raising money from friends and family, you are fully committed to making the success, right? You're not going to want this to fail at any.
You're going to ruin Christmas
right?
or whatever. Yeah.
Whereas if you raise money from some VC in, you know, Silicon Valley, it doesn't really matter to you if it doesn't work out. Right? So that's one element. The other is the network we bring on board through our investors. They are amazing people. They are directly invested. They've got their own experience, network, and ideas. They are essentially part of the team. So we have a team of, you know, 60 people now who are working with us, helping us achieve success. So they all bring connections. They can be investors or potential clients or just ideas for the app. But this has opened up opportunities. You know, so we've we've made really good connections in terms of like business development, and we have a whole B2B stream now, which has basically come out organically through our investor network, and that's something we wouldn't have had otherwise.
So don't treat friends and family label as derogatory. Like your friends and your family can actually be quite a wide network of really interesting people.
They can, yeah. It's really difficult going out and asking them for money. I don't want to sort of downplay that, but you know, as long as you do it with the right attitude and you believe this is going to succeed, I think it's perfectly okay, and they have everything to grow.
I personally like my friends and my family. I think one lens through which we watch this whole discussion is that of survivability bias, right? So, you know, like we touched on earlier, you have a business, right, which is in a market. You've built a product, and you're here talking to us now. So clearly, a lot of the decisions that you've made along the way in terms of funding and investor relations are the right ones. Any missteps that you can talk about on the way? Anything that you wish you hadn't done or had done? Just to dig into that a little more.
I think there's, I mean, steps. I guess where to start is one way to look at it. There's missteps all the way, and that's how you learn. There's never, I think, a straight path from A to, like, you know, success or whatever you view success to be. We've made a lot of mistakes. I guess two I can think of is the way we built tech. So we've had to rebuild it a couple of times, and this comes down to not knowing what is going to be the best solution in the end, and that's been very costly in terms of money and time. And I think we've also lost some good people along the way in terms of like not being able to raise money faster. So, you know, when you have good people in the company, they're not going to stick around to wait for success if they don't see it coming around the corner. Like I have that longevity because I'm the founder. I'm never going to go anywhere, but other people have other options and they're less invested. So I don't know, maybe there's things I could have done differently to keep core people on board. But you know, that's something we've lost some good people along the way. It's part of the journey.
Yeah, startup life is not for everyone, and it's not all Silicon Valley TV show. So we've got a few questions from Tony in the chat asking what your customer base looks like in terms of personal and business users, and also with that business lens, what markets or profiles are you targeting, and where's the traction? So asset managers, fund managers, lenders, brokers, traditional banking.
So I mean, in terms of the customer base for the app, we're seeing two cohorts. Like one is like everyday investors who are looking to, like, these be like students or young professionals who are looking to get into investing for the first time and maximize their potential. They're facing the cost of living crisis, so these can be like 25 to 35-year-olds putting in regular deposits to try and build up a bit of a buffer or save off for a house deposit, that kind of thing. The other one, which is kind of surprising me, is more sophisticated and older investors. These are people who are senior in finance firms, and they are now kind of our power users in a sense. They are these are people who very well understand the financial market and know about the products out there. They know about our competition, and they are excited because they now have the ability to build something personalized, which they couldn't before. So they directly resonate with the core sort of founding mission that we set out on a path to solve. And we're seeing these people invest and advocate for us and use the product. So that's great to see. And I think that's good kind of omen. In the business side, we're seeing so many opportunities because the technology we've built, it provides this separately managed accounts for investors according to each investor's bespoke mandate. That is something that is needed across the industry. It's not something I thought about when starting up the business. I just thought about building a retail app for my own investments. But it turns out, because I wanted to do something so flexible, we had to build the tech in such a flexible way. It does solve this problem for our other businesses, and these include wealth managers, banks, pension funds. And so I guess to kind of make it more concrete, the cohorts where we're seeing traction are traditional wealth managers. There's a big drive towards digitization in this space. So they need some kind of platform where they can put investments onto it and manage it in a personalized way. And the other is sort of treasury management within firms. So we have the ability to manage money, in any kind of risk appetite. So if you have a treasury which wants to just take low risk investments into money market funds, we can achieve that at low cost. If they want to sort of put a pot into more alpha generation equity investments, we can also achieve that. So there's a lot of mileage, I think, for us to explore in both of those.
That's really interesting. It makes me think of Octopus Energy and building a way to manage power for other companies, or Ocado building a way to manage warehouses for other companies. They had a problem, they solved a problem and realized their solution actually has value for others without giving away your market share too. That's interesting. And there's another question before we move on to tech about ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. Do you do ESG? Used to be very important, maybe slightly less trendy than it used to be, but is that one of the levers inside your strategy design?
It's definitely less trendy, but it's no less important. I think it's critical. It's super important. I mean, at a high level, we want to provide an investment platform where people can invest into whatever they want. We don't want to impose anything on people. So the vision is, if you want to set up a strategy that is ESG aligned, you should be able to do that. And if you kind of dig around on the internet, you'll see that in some of our early messaging, sustainability was prominent on that. We haven't implemented it in the app yet because essentially it's been a challenge of resources. You need to pay for quite expensive data and then build bespoke models for it. So it is something we're going to do in the future. We just haven't got around to it yet.
Thanks, Tony, for those questions. I think start to talk about technology now. We're just in the last kind of 10 minutes of the conversation, and your path. Like, one of the ways of looking at your path has been like, you built this thing, right? But your background is in mathematics. And so how did you go about building a product?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I kind of resent my choice, I guess, a little bit at university. I started off my PhD and I was given the choice: do you want to do something which is computational and programming based, or do you want to do something pen and paper? And I thought it would be more fun to be a purist and solve some mathematical problem based on fundamental research. And so I didn't do anything in terms of programming there. But in my job, I did get some exposure to it, you know, through VBA first of all, and then through C++. But none of these languages are of any use to what I was trying to build here. So I had this vision of providing a retail product.
But not building VBA.
You can't really. I mean, could have tried, but it would have been a different product. But it had to be an app, right? So, and I had no idea about apps, and I still think the whole thing's incredible, the fact that it actually works, the end-to-end process. But I started off just trying to learn what the simplest thing I could do was to build a prototype, and that turned out to be a progressive web app, PWA. So I learned some JavaScript and Python, and found some kind of simple processes to deploy it using Mongo and Heroku, and got it up and running. And it was kind of working in a web format, but it looked like an app. When you open it up, it has an app format, behaves like an app. And that was kind of an exciting process. So you kind of learned a lot around cloud computing, job management, queuing, latency. And that's always been important to me, actually, to be, I don't have an aspiration to be a CTO or a lead developer.
Right.
I do find it interesting, but I think there's just people who are much better at it than me. But I do want to have good enough understanding to have a sensible conversation with everyone and talk about architecture and design, because I think that helps build a successful company in the long run. So I wanted to build that prototype, not just to raise money, but also to understand what I'm building. But then we brought on board, after that first fundraise, we brought on board a developer who was much better than I was, built something professionally. And this is all built in AWS and also in Python, but using Django REST framework to kind of as the architecture for the whole system. And I've sort of spent as much time as I could learning from him, but I was very much focused on kind of building the strategies and the quantitative side of the business. And
get back to your roots a bit.
Back to my roots, yeah. And yeah. He built, he often says he built a cathedral, and he did. Like, the system he built is tremendous, but then ended up leaving. So he's the one I mentioned. He left, and then that was a huge challenge. Like, so it was basically me and him on the back end, and I had very limited exposure. He got another job.
He's just to recap. You learned enough from a C++ background via a little VBA, which I will forgive you for. You learned enough programming and software development skills to build a progressive web app with a Python backend, which performed this, enough of this fairly incredible platform, to take to investors. You built all that. And then you handed this over to a person who became a CTO, who looked at it, took the good bits, replaced the bad bits, built this. The word cathedral for me reminds me of quite like a Baroque architecture, very extensible, very purist in terms of architectural choices. Like a software engineer would look at it and think, this is good software engineering. And then and moved away from your skill set and your background and your experience, and then left, and then handed you back a platform, maybe in a language that you didn't know, using frameworks that you didn't know, using architectural patterns that you weren't aware of, and you also had a business to run.
Yeah, that's framing it nicely. So he handed that over to me, and this was during the kind of process where we were starting to test the technology, late stages in our application to the FCAs. This had to work. We had people testing simulated strategies, not real money, but testing simulated strategies. And he said, unfortunately, Daniel, I've got another job. I'm going to be leaving, and he got 4 weeks notice, and then he was off. And then the next week he went on holiday, and then the whole system went down. And so
Nice.
I don't know what the hell went wrong. We're looking through like DynamoDB and all kinds of refresh tokens and stuff, and calling up everyone I could to figure out. But that was an amazing learning curve, to be honest. It was stressful and challenging, but right in at the deep end in terms of sophisticated Django architecture, sophisticated API architecture, and a cloud architecture I wasn't familiar with. And so I had to kind of learn the whole thing, get it, and maintain it. My aspiration at that point wasn't to build any new functionality. It was just to keep it working until I found someone who could take over. And I think I had to do that for about 3 months or so. And then brought another developer who, he's been a godsend, basically. He's really taken on board all the challenges, performing a role much more senior than his actual level of experience. And I think it's that attitude from people who are in the business who make us succeed. People taking ownership of a problem and making it work, even if it's outside of their kind of core remit.
I guess the like naive lesson to take from that is the key person syndrome, right? Make sure there's no one person that understands everything, but that doesn't really work in a startup environment, right? Where you don't have that.
Just ask your investors for twice as much money.
Right? Yeah, you can't do that. I guess the real deeper lesson would be that kind of thing's going to happen, and no one loves your business like you do, and no one will stand by it like you will. And so at some point you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and be in a very, very uncomfortable make or break situation where everything rests on your shoulders, basically.
Yeah, and I think that sort of shows the value of a technical founder. I don't necessarily consider myself a technical founder, but I'm able to kind of understand the system. That's not necessarily ideal. You want someone who has built it and is intimately familiar with it, but I'm familiar enough to keep it ticking over. And that in itself has value. And I think that's ultimately why I wanted to build this prototype, so I could understand how cloud architecture works. Nice. But there's the other kind of thing in challenge in terms of technical architecture is how we built the system initially, and we probably don't have enough time to go into it now because we're kind of getting towards the end of the hour, but we made a lot of decisions early on in terms of really trying to make it a cathedral and build microservices, lots of complexity into the system. I think that probably was a mistake early on. We could have done a simpler job and ended up with something good enough for the market.
Yeah, that balance of MVP with the emphasis on the M for minimal and coming from an enterprise environment, needing to be regulated, having this voice in the back of your head about doing it properly in quotes. That's a really tricky balance to strike, but it does sound like you've got there without too much scarring along the way.
There's a bit. There is a bit.
It's been fascinating hearing you talk through it. So I want to thank all of our audience and Daniel especially, and I'll hand back to Barry for wrapping it up.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm just going to pop a link on there just before people do go on the chat. So hopefully that will open and you should be able to use it. So that is that's a document I talked about and I forgot to actually post in the chat earlier. So you can connect with everyone else that's on the call, connect with Jon, connect with Sam, connect with Daniel and myself. And I'd encourage you to put your own LinkedIn on there just so that you can all connect with each other. That's ultimately the whole point of these events, is to bring people together who share similar stories, similar interests. I'm sure, Daniel, you're happy to be connected by everyone on the call if anyone's got any further questions about anything you've covered.
Yeah, delighted to be. Please reach out.
Fantastic. So yeah, thank you so much for all joining us. Huge thanks, Daniel. That was awesome and so interesting. And of course, Sam and Jon for hosting. If anybody would like to come on board and share their story, we're going to take a brief hiatus as Sam is finally coming back to London, coming back home from Brooklyn. So the next ones are going to be starting in about a month on 7th of October. And then we'll have one or two founders on those. But yeah, one more time, thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you at the next one.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Daniel. Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.